Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of WJ Live. I'm Joe Setien. I'm one of your co-hosts. I'm a deputy managing editor at the Western Journal. To my right is Michael Austin. He's a reporter at the Western Journal. And to my left is Deborah Van Kempen. She is, as of today, no longer an intern, but rather an editor at the Western Journal.
Woo!
We have got a show full of exciting stuff for you today. We're going to start by talking about Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. We're going to talk about internet freedom, all that fun stuff. We're also going to talk about the left's new narrative of Trump supporters inciting violence and what that means for the future of conservatism. And finally, we're going to talk about AOC and other radical far-left Democrats calling on GOP members of Congress to resign. And we're going to dissect it and analyze it every which way. But first off, we're going to start talking about Section 230. Yes. And that's something that's kind of near and dear to my heart, right? As a libertarian and as someone who loves internet freedom. And you've probably seen it in the news recently.
All over.
Yep. With big tech, what they've done is you can't really parse it any other way. They've cracked down on conservatives. They banned President Trump from the platform, which I don't think they should have done. Yep. They're banning a number of conservative voices, people like that. People are losing followers. All this stuff is going on. And you're hearing a lot of talk from people saying we need to repeal Section 230. President Trump has said that Section 230 provides big tech companies like Google and Facebook and Twitter special immunity that no other companies have that shields them from lawsuits. So here's the question. What is Section 230? What does it do? And is repealing it a good idea? Mm-hmm. So the first thing that I want to do is read the relevant section in U.S. Code, federal law, which is only 26 words. Yep. Section 230 is Section 230 of the 1996 Communications Decency Act. And here is what this relevant portion reads. No provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. Now, in plain English, what this means is that when you go on Facebook and let's say you write something defamatory about someone, right? And that person wants to sue you for defamation. Mm-hmm. They can sue you, but they can't sue Facebook because Facebook is not legally responsible for your speech. Mm-hmm. Now, what advocates of Section 230 will say is that Section 230 is why we have the free and open internet of today. Without it, if companies like Facebook or Google, companies which we don't really like, as conservatives, as libertarians, I don't think they're doing a very good job. But if they were liable for their users' speech, they wouldn't want anything to be on their platform. They wouldn't want any political speech. They wouldn't want anything controversial. They would moderate the heck out of everything, and you wouldn't really be able to say anything because they wouldn't want to be legally liable for it. Or, in order to avoid this problem altogether, they would not moderate anything. And then what you would have is an internet full of pornography and spam. And if you've ever checked your email spam folder, that's a good idea of what you might expect. Now, I know there are people with good faith arguments who disagree with me on Section 230. A lot of conservatives are saying we should repeal it. So my question for you guys, I'll go to Michael first and then Deborah if you want to chime in.
Yeah.
Should we repeal Section 230? Why or why not?
There's people on both sides saying we repeal it, and they're all wrong. Like, we can't get rid of Section 230. However, I think we can amend some of it a little bit. It protects the blog hosts or whatever companies from
us.
It protects everyone.
The Western Journal when our readers comment.
If you want to censor obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable content, and I think the wording and the protection there, otherwise objectionable content, I think we could change that. You could offer more protections for like people to be able to have minor disagreements without giving them the power to censor that. Mm-hmm. And I think that would, there's a nice middle ground here where you can like allow more types of speech to be free from censorship,
right?
But still allow them to censor porn, still allow places to censor all these other things. And it doesn't take away Section 230. You're just changing some of the protections that were within the overall law.
So you're saying then the companies, the whatever, like Facebook or whatever company is would they be liable?
So you can censor all these different things, except if you censor, like, let's say, minor political disagreements, you would lose your protections.
Okay, but what about who says what's minor or not? How do you draw that line?
I don't know specifically where you would put that, but I'm just saying there's like a difference between like obscene, like there are some pretty clear lines with obscene words and behaviors and ideas and stuff that would just be, common held opinions. And I think, like, I don't have the absolute solution here, but I think you can find a middle line where you can say, okay, you can ban all this content, but you can't ban certain opinions and still keep your protections.
Okay. Now, do you think it's the government's job, though, to basically say you can't ban opinions?
No, like, I'm a free market guy, but after seeing what's happened over the past few days with a lot of this censorship stuff, and I know a lot of people are arguing that the social media platforms are kind of the new public square. I don't think that's completely accurate, but it's becoming increasingly so. And I think when it comes to issues like this, I don't think it's always like, oh, you got to find the middle ground.
Right.
Sometimes it's either on one side or the other. But in this case, I think you can find a middle ground where you don't give social media companies as much censorship powers without totally repealing all of the protections that 230 gives them.
Yeah, because it's not just the protections that Section 230 is giving is not just social media companies or big tech companies. It's literally any. It's anyone.
Right.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on this, Deborah?
Yeah, so I feel like I kind of tend to agree with both of you, but in different ways. So when I was thinking about this earlier, I was thinking about it kind of in the sense that I think that we wouldn't have as big of an issue with Section 230 if it wasn't for the events that have been going on in the past few days. If it wasn't for Twitter taking Trump off of their platform, if it wasn't for Amazon and Google and Apple shutting down Parler, if it wasn't for all of these things. And so I think that the biggest issue for me is that I don't believe that we should repeal Section 230, but I do think that we should demand that big tech holds to one standard about who or what they're going to censor on their platforms, because right now it seems like the only standard they have is you don't agree with us.
Yeah. What's the standard, though? Like, who makes the standard? Because it's... who has the power to sort of tell them, make an arbitrary, like, you have to do this? Where does that authority come from?
Yeah, that is the difficult question, because I do think that there's power in free speech that the government shouldn't be able to take away from people and shouldn't be able to take away from even big platforms like Facebook and Twitter. But I do think that ethically they have a moral obligation to be able to conform to one standard for all of their users.
Yes. Oh, I agree.
Yes.
I think most people with, at least on our side, in the liberty movement side, would say, Twitter and Facebook should not be banning conservatives just cause.
Right.
They kind of used two of Trump's more tame tweets, called them, incitement of violence, which I know we'll talk about with your segment later on, Michael. But no one really bought that explanation. They kind of just banned him because they were looking for a reason for a very long time to ban him.
Yeah.
I think ethically and morally you're correct. We should value free speech, and that means we should value free speech for everyone. It means, quite frankly, we should value free speech for Nazis, for neo-Nazis who are despicable people, and we should value free speech for far left people as long as they're not actually calling for violence. And it means we should value free speech for conservatives. And I wish that Facebook and Twitter and all of these platforms would actually realize that.
And to make one thing perfectly clear, I think we should value free speech for these organizations to pick and choose who they want on their platforms, but they have to be consistent with the rules that they are dishing out.
Absolutely.
Ethically, I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think you're right. All right. So here's my next question. I've asked, what your opinions are, what you actually think about this. So my grift, as it were, is always to ask, what do you think will happen next? So I guess today's January 12th, in 8 days, we're going to see the Biden administration. I think some things are going to get changed up in Washington as a result of that. What do you expect will happen with Section 230 and with big tech censorship and bias under Joe Biden as president and Democrats in control of both houses of Congress?
It's hard to say. I mean, it seems like there is a pretty big bipartisan push to remove Section 230. And seems like Republicans are willing to cede some ground,
Yeah.
if you might say. So, I mean, I think it's under threat, which isn't a good thing.
No, I agree.
So,
Yeah.
for sure.
It's one of those bipartisan things where it's bipartisan sounds great in theory, right? It's everyone working together. Unless everyone's working together on something that's really bad.
Yeah.
And then bipartisan's kind of the worst thing ever. And this, I think, is one of those examples where kind of both sides have decided that Section 230 is bad and it needs to go. What do you think, Deborah?
Yeah, definitely. I think that just the push to repeal it over the past few weeks has just been overwhelming, that I think that there's a good chance that they might be able to do so. I don't think it's in our best interest at all, especially considering what we were talking about earlier with, on one end of the spectrum, they could just censor anything and everything that people put out. And on the other end, they could censor nothing and let all of this stuff kind of run rampant on their platforms. But I do think that we're moving in a direction where people want to see it repealed.
Yeah, I unfortunately do agree. I hope that they don't repeal it because I think it's very important. The reason that we have had this internet that we've had for the past 25 years since the Communications Decency Act was passed is, I think, in large part because of Section 230. And I will warn conservatives who I understand are angry about this stuff. They're angry about big tech bias. Repealing Section 230 I do not think is the way to go, and I think it will only make things worse for you.
And, we're in an age where nuance is just completely lost. But I do think there's a solution where you can amend some of the language. And, conservatives would be happy.
Libertarians wouldn't.
Libertarians wouldn't. Democrats might be, some of them would be happy, but the tech companies themselves would be happy that they wouldn't be
the
held.
Tech companies want to be regulated.
Yeah.
Which
But
is unfortunate.
No, anyone that wants to just repeal the entire thing that's just nonsense.
Of course. Now, speaking of nuance, I think that we're going to talk about an issue where the left kind of doesn't have any nuance because they are pursuing one angle and they have an agenda, as they always do, and that's when it comes to the narrative of incitement of violence. That's Michael's segment. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, so... Sorry, I had something caught in my throat.
Good timing.
Anyway, so Trump was banned from Twitter. That's what we've been talking about. And Twitter put up this blog kind of explaining why they banned the president permanently from their platform. And the argument they made was that in 2 tweets, he incited violence and was stirring up his supporters to cause more harm, like what happened at the Capitol. And so these are the 2 tweets that they claimed that Trump posted that they say incited violence. The 75 million great American patriots who voted for me, America first, and Make America Great Again will have a giant voice long into the future. They will not be disrespected or treated unfairly in any way, shape, or form. The second tweet Trump put out was this: to all of those who have asked, I will not be going to the inauguration on January 20th. Okay. So Twitter's arguing that those 2 tweets were inciting violence. Now, the argument they're making is that his base is all frothed up that, the election was stolen, which is something he keeps repeating. I don't agree with him on that, but he has the right, he can have that opinion to say that, and the supporters, I'm fine with that. But their argument is, by him kind of repeating those claims and by saying, I'm not going to go to the inauguration, that, that's inciting violence because they're just going to get more mad. That's essentially what the argument is.
Yeah.
And we're seeing this be, so obviously that's a really circuitous argument that just really, that's such a stretch and could be used in almost any political argument whatsoever. And we're going to pull up a tweet here where there's an example of this being used in another way. So Lila Rose of Live Action tweeted, abortion is violence. And then Leah Torres, she's an abortionist. She's got a really large following on Twitter. She wrote to Lila Rose saying abortion is violence. This is violent rhetoric. It is objectively false and meant to incite others to commit crimes against clinics, patients, and healthcare providers. This is what domestic terrorism looks like. And so if you think about what Lila Rose said, if you think about what Trump said, and you think about how the left, how Twitter and how Torres is kind of describing those opinions, you can really just say, all conservative opinions at some point, they're inciting violence against another group. And so then they need to be silenced. They shouldn't be on any of our platforms. And so I just wanted to get your guys' opinion on this and just ask, will this be the left's new strategy going forward to basically say, okay, so you think that, abortion is bad. You think that abortion is murder. So if you say abortion is murder, that's going to incite people to go attack abortion clinics. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, obviously the logic is insane, but you can see the thread there for someone that is really far left. And they can make that argument. So do you think this is going to be the left strategy going forward? It seems they've really dug in deep with the Trump stuff following the Capitol Hill, and it seems to be working for them in terms of their base, and they're winning over a lot of, I think, moderates with just how much they're pushing it in the short term. But do you think they're going to just kind of use this sort of strategy going forward, just saying, yeah, they're inciting violence by arguing these different points?
Yeah, I think they are. And unfortunately, I think it's because it's easy to do.
Yes.
Right? It's easy for both sides to do. I've seen conservatives do this
Yes.
also
Yeah.
before in the past. It's not something that, only one side is guilty of. It is
Yes.
a terrible logical fallacy. Right?
Yes.
You're basically just saying, you said something I don't like, and then violence happened. Now you're inciting violence. Now, I do think it's important to note, when President Trump,
Yes.
this may not be popular with many of our viewers, when President Trump spoke to that rally before the riots at the Capitol Hill, I think that what he said incited them to go and riot, incited some of them, very few of them, but some of them to go and riot. I don't think legally that could ever be
He was
proven.
he was
He
definitely
egged them on.
raising the temperature.
Yeah,
he was definitely rising tensions. In terms of, I believe incitement is more of a in the legal definition.
In the legal definition,
Yeah.
no, he didn't.
He-
He
yes.
did not. He egged them on, and he probably egged on the people who were already looking for something, for windows to break.
But I would
stuff.
even say with that language, like egging them on, like it was never his intention.
No, it was not his intention.
Right.
It
Yes.
was not his intention.
Yeah.
Does he have some responsibility for it?
Yes.
Probably.
I think
Yes.
I think all honest people would have to agree
Yeah.
that the way he disseminates his rhetoric made things worse.
Now,
Yeah.
that
and he
being
could have been better about
said,
it.
the left
Yeah.
made things worse for themselves.
Oh,
because
definitely.
Yes.
basically what Twitter did and what that abortion doctor did in that tweet that you posted below is basically saying anything you say that we don't like, that's violence. Trump saying he's not going to the inauguration, that's
Yes.
violence.
Yes.
That's a tame Trump tweet. Have you been
Yes.
following Donald Trump's Twitter feed for the
Yes.
past 8 years?
Yeah.
He's been saying so much worse stuff than that.
And
so
yeah.
what are they doing? There's no standard.
And before we
Yeah.
get to you, Deborah, I just
Yeah.
you reminded me of one thing when you said, and look, the right does this about the left too, and you could there was a do you remember the shooting of the Bernie Sanders supporter?
Yeah,
He
James
shot
Hodgkinson.
so he shot up the congressional
Police.
baseball
Yeah.
game.
Yeah, the practice. Yeah.
That is not Bernie Sanders' fault.
No.
Not at all. However, when Bernie Sanders tells all of his supporters they're killing your grandma by not giving her free health care and stuff, that helps ratchet up the tension.
Yeah.
Do you think
In much the same way.
Do you think that Bernie Sanders has just as much responsibility for the congressional baseball game practice shooting as Trump does?
No,
for
I
Capitol
don't think
riots?
it's. I don't think they're. I mean, they're just completely different situations.
I
but
agree with you.
but I'm just saying, like, if we just were to extrapolate this all to different political opinions, I mean, we all get heated, we all get passionate. You could make this argument about any political position on either side of the aisle.
Yeah.
Like, well, they're so drastic with their rhetoric. Their
basically
supporters,
violence.
exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, what do you think about that, Deborah?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think obviously it's just completely awful reasoning to suggest that
Yeah.
Trump said, I'm not going to the inauguration, therefore we're going to storm the Capitol. That doesn't make sense at all. And I know that Trump can be an idiot sometimes with the things that he says. I don't think anybody
Sometimes.
here is. All right,
Yeah.
well, I don't think anybody here is denying that, but I do not think that he was 100% the reason why people decided to break windows and storm in. And I think that we could argue about the percentage of who was responsible and who was kind of responsible, but I think that basically
Yeah.
as a conservative party on the whole, we believe in personal responsibility. We believe that if you shoot someone, you pulled the trigger, you are responsible for
Yes.
that person's death. And so I think that that's really what we need to talk about here. And I think that we could also argue that the tweets and the rhetoric that Democrats were spewing out over the summer when it came to all the George Floyd protests were just completely inciting violence if we're going by their standard of what that means.
Yeah.
And I brought up the Bernie Sanders example, which definitely wasn't as much of a one-to-one example. I do think his rhetoric is extremely
The millionaires and the billionaires have too much power in this society.
Well, children are starving and the Republicans are greedy.
Starving. The Republicans are very greedy. But don't worry. We will have healthcare for all.
The top 1%.
The top 1%.
But the BLM comparison, that one is much more apt for this situation. They were literally forgiving the riots.
Yeah.
They were, they're Black Lives Matter supporters, leaders, activists. Now it's a decentralized organization, so it's kind of tricky when you say, well, they supported this and they supported this. But, as a whole, the movement itself was not very strong in condemning any of the violence that took place.
Right.
And the rhetoric of cops hunting down and murdering black people, which is completely false if you look at all the data, if you do a multivariate analysis of how police shootings happen in this country.
Sure. I'm a criminal justice reform advocate.
Yes.
Very much so.
Of course.
That narrative that cops are hunting down black people and shooting them for sport is 100% false.
And spreading that narrative, of course that would incite violence against police. And, we've seen record high violence against police in the past year. So
let me say something important, and I think this is important for both sides, though.
Yes.
Don't take this attack, this the left saying, incitement of violence. Don't take them calling everything an incitement of violence as anything less than a massive attack on free speech.
Yeah.
Because the Supreme Court has ruled, and most courts agree, that the First Amendment protects your expression, your free speech, up until the point where you legitimately, incite violent rhetoric. So by lowering the standard, the bar for what violent rhetoric is, the left is basically saying you don't have free speech anymore. They're trying to take away your First Amendment rights. It is clever if you don't miss it. If you miss it, it's clever. They're doing it in this way that says, look, we just don't want people, we're worried about violence and violent rhetoric. We don't want people to do this. And it's actually just a way for them to take away your First
silence
Amendment.
conservative voices.
Yeah.
And everyone's voices.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
Yeah. And Deborah, I think you were going to talk about some similarly
Sorry for the
yes,
tangent.
get ready
deceitful
for this.
tactics being used by Democrats.
Yeah, definitely. So in the past week, ever since the Capitol incursion, we have seen lots of far-left Democrats calling for several GOP congressmen to resign from their positions, saying that they were the ones that were inciting this violence, that they were the ones that prompted people to storm the Capitol. Most notably among those are Senator Ted Cruz, Senator Josh Hawley. There was even a story that we did today about Representative Scott Perry of Pennsylvania, that people were calling for his resignation, and he released an official statement on his website that just said no.
Check it out on the Western Journal.
Check it out. It's a good one. But just this overwhelming leftist narrative that's going on about election skeptics being seditionists or being inciters of violence is just completely insane. And even Matt Gaetz, in his floor speech after the electoral or during the electoral count vote certification, he was talking about this, and he was just kind of talking about the pure hypocrisy that's going on, where we are seeing them calling for people to resign, and there was much less opposition to protests that were happening over the summer, like we were kind of talking about earlier. So my first question for you both, and I'll pass it to Michael first and then Joe, do you think that these calls are actually going to prompt any GOP congressmen to resign?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
No. Yeah. And I do have to say, out of all the Democrats that are pushing for this, I think AOC is the one being the most just, her rhetoric is extremely dangerous, the way that she is
Don't call
characterizing
it
people. Yeah.
First Amendment.
I mean, look, I'm not going to say she's inciting violence, but she's definitely, this is not the party of unity that we were promised.
Yeah.
I'll just say that.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I do think that it's theater on both sides, right? So
Yeah.
I respect the legal constitutional right or whatever of the Republican members of Congress, the Republican senators, to challenge the certification of the Electoral College. Do I agree with them? No. I think it was bound to fail, and I think the election has been proven many times that Joe Biden won a fair election.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, those Republicans, I think, were, kind of being clowns by challenging it when they didn't have any anything else, they knew they weren't going to win. They knew whatever they were.
I'm pretty sure some of them did it for purely
political
symbolic
theater.
purposes.
Like literally everything in Congress is. It's not a Republican thing. It's not a Democrat thing. It is a politics thing. Everyone is an entertainer. Everyone, it's theater. That being said, the Democrats then turned it around and are doing the same thing now. They're saying, resign, resign, resign at the theater that you did, and now we're going to be doing our own political theater. It's just grandstanding, which is what Congress has been for hundreds of years. And if there's any positive we can take away from all of the kind of the craziness of the past couple months, the past year, it's that grandstanding and political theater in Congress is alive and well.
Yeah.
It has never died, and it's never going to die.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. So my next question is kind of, I'll go off your grift, Joe. What's next for conservatives moving forward? Basically, what are GOP electors going to take from this, if anything, from this election cycle now that we know that Democrats don't want to give them a voice at all?
Well, I think that they already knew that to an extent. So I think the left is going to get more riled up and the right is going to get more riled up.
Yeah.
What I hope happens is that people realize that the two-party system has sort of failed them, right? The deficit, the debt and the deficit, when it started at the Trump administration was a lot smaller. It was still very large, but it's gotten a lot bigger over the Trump administration. We have not officially departed from any foreign wars, really, in the 4 years, even though we've made a lot of progress in many areas. But a lot of conservative things that, or libertarian or America First principles that people pushed for have not happened. Republicans said they were going to repeal and replace Obamacare. They tried it. It didn't work, and then they gave up on it. And that was 3.5 years ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think GOP voters are sick of that. They're sick of the Democrats with their grandstanding and with calling them racists and calling them hateful people and whatever. They're also sick of the GOP not living up to their promises. And to an extent, Trump lived up to a lot of his promises, and he didn't live up to a lot of other of them. And they're realizing that even an outsider politician is not able to fulfill all his promises. So I hope that makes them realize, the two-party system is just irretrievably broken. I don't know if that's the right word, but it is broken.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's before we institute a new party, I think there's other hopes we can have.
We're not talking about instituting another party.
I know.
There's the Libertarian Party, the Green Party, the Constitutional Party. There's a lot of
but like I think there's a lot of conservatives that would like to see that, but if that is ever going to happen, that's going to take a lot of time. In the meantime, I think I'd like to see conservatives start to rally around just better voices. Like Trump was very good at getting his messaging down against the left. When it came to understanding a lot of the policies and stuff he was talking about, and when it came to acting civil, that's, he's really a tragic figure in that, Trump, he did a lot of great things and he could have accomplished so much more. But the tragedy of it all was that it was really his own faults that kind of kept him from reaching that pinnacle of greatness. And I think we can learn from this. We can learn from what he did, and we can take that on and we can improve upon it going forward. Now, do I trust the GOP to do that? Not really at all.
Do you trust Mitch McConnell? Never let us down.
But you're seeing new movements pop up on the right that are promising because of Trump.
Yeah.
Like
and I'm excited about that.
Sorry, not to put you on
I'm
the
just
spot.
saying. I'm just saying.
I agree with you. I would think it would be helpful.
Younger voices, like even though she didn't win, Kimberly Klacik, kind of that kind of lane of people.
I think she still says that she won.
Yeah.
I think she got 20% of the vote, but she claims that she won.
But there's a lot of younger voices getting into politics on the right, and there's a lot of grifters.
There are.
But there are also a lot of people that actually they have their messaging down. They understand the arguments. They can make the emotional argument, which is what we've needed to do for a really long time. So my hope is that we can lean more into that going forward.
Yeah.
And just beat the left when it comes to the culture war and the messaging war. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe this is sort of related to that. I don't mean to hijack your
Go for it.
conversation.
All yours.
But it is. Do we move on from Trump?
I was just
Republicans
going to ask
That's-
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
do they? or is Trump still the Republican Party?
I think that there are so many people that Trump was just an iconic figure for the Republican Party in the sense that he did something that we kind of haven't seen happen before, and that he was a president that was not afraid to say what he really thought, that was not afraid to take down people that he thought needed to be taken down, that he was just very, very blunt and very just kind of aggressive, in his, not only in his rhetoric, but just in what he did. And I do think that he was able to accomplish a lot of really great things in his presidency. But I think that because of that, because of kind of the role that he stepped into, I think that it might be hard for a lot of Republicans to move on to a different kind of more moderate, more mild president after.
It's a really scary place for us to be in, because it seems like if we fully abandon him, that's not going to be good. And then if we fully go full Trump, that probably wouldn't be fully good either. But yeah, I think that there have been, we're seeing a sort of Trumpian conservative movement that's started. Now, that's not 100% a good thing. We saw plenty of bad come from that on January 6th or whatever day that was. That will go down in infamy.
To Chuck Schumer, a day that will live in infamy.
But and those are radicals, but they exist. But I think there's a lot to be hopeful for to come out of the Trump era.
Yeah.
So.
I think there's wins.
Yes.
I think that we got to take away we have to take parts of Trumpism, right?
Yes.
That I think
Yes.
were really good for conservatism.
Yes.
Yeah.
So as a libertarian, Republicans have traditionally been very, very foreign policy hawks, right? And President Trump was not that. He said, take our troops home. We're spending money. We're spending American blood, and it is not worth it. And it is not our job to be the world's police. And he's really the kind of the first big Republican to actually run for president on that platform. We got to keep that, because that appeals to people. It appeals to people who don't want to lose their sons and daughters to Middle Eastern violence. And it appeals to people, to taxpayers who don't want trillions of dollars to go to wars in countries they're never going to see.
Right.
So parts of it, you have to realize that President Trump was probably the best president for criminal justice reform that we've had in a very, very long time, maybe ever. And you take parts of Trumpism, right, and you say, okay, let's add these to conservatism. And then you take parts I don't particularly like. I think the trade part is not great. You take the parts of just the demeanor and the not being civil, and I think you say, look, we have to be fighters, but we have to be civil to the people we disagree with, and I don't think Trump was that way.
He was great on education, too.
He was really good on education. Betsy DeVos is one of the best education secretaries we've had. I know you can talk about that.
I could.
Kingdom Come.
I could. Maybe for another time. So it looks like we're just about out of time for today.
We are.
Thanks for joining us. You can find WJ Live on every weekday, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. To our audio listeners, go to youtube.com/WJ Live, click the subscribe button, and hit the bell. Ding! To be notified when a new podcast goes live. To those of you who are joining us on YouTube, you can also listen to WJ Live on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Finally, what would help us out the most, if you want to support real journalism that speaks the truth, you can become a subscriber at westernjournal.com/join.
Not .com.
Not .com.
.com.
C-O-M. Yeah. And so thanks for joining us for today, and see you tomorrow.
Bye.
The Western Journal has rolled out a brand new subscription model designed specifically for readers like you, who want the unvarnished truth that the establishment media won't tell you. Our multi-tiered plans give you exactly what you want and help us fight fake news during this, the most important election of our lives. Become a subscriber to the Western Journal today and unlock exclusive features you won't find anywhere else. It's easy. Just follow the prompts in this video to join us in equipping readers with the truth.